Abraham Lincoln you describe as the first Republican. And what does it mean to be a Republican in this sense of the term? Because, maybe you mean it in the same way that again, I don't know this, was he the first member of the Republican Party?
He was the first president who was a Republican, yes, who was the Republican Party. No, it is really important, though. The Republican Party, most people don't know this, right? The Republican Party grew out of the implosion of the Whig Party. Kind of like we're seeing the Republican Party of today implode. The Whig Party imploded in the 1850s. Why did the Whig Party implode? The Whig Party was the party of John Quincy Adams. It was the party of economic development. It was the anti-Jackson Party, right? Jackson was trying to serve the common man. The Whig Party wanted no inflation. They wanted a national bank. They wanted to preserve power for powerful people in the United States. The Whig Party split on the slavery issue. It split apart on the slavery issue. The Republican Party emerged. Lincoln was one of the first Republican activists, too. The Republican Party emerged in the upper Midwest, in Wisconsin, in Illinois, in Ohio, in upstate New York. It was a party of white men who were opposed to slavery. And why were they opposed to slavery? Because they were white men who had small businesses and small farms, but they could not afford slaves. And slavery actually undercut their wages. If a slave could do what they would do, why would anyone hire them? And so they were opposed to the expansion of slavery. And this is a party then that emerges in the 1850s saying, we're not sure what to do about slavery in the South, but the new states, the states that will border Illinois going farther west, those states should not have slavery. The Democrats, the Southern Democrats they must have slavery in those states because they want to control the Senate. And they need to have enough slave states to control the Senate. So that's where the party emerges. If Jackson is about giving land to the common man, Lincoln is about protecting the common man's wages. The Republican Party is about free labor, free soil, free men. Every man should be able to work and get paid for their work. And then they should be able to buy land when they're paid for their work. And slavery makes it hard to get paid for your work because the slave will do it for free.
And just so we can judge whether Lincoln was successful after we continue talking about him, what were his priorities going into the presidency, though, of course, they were forced to shift?
Well, his biggest priority, he says this in his inaugural address, is to hold the Union together and to keep the Union together without the spread of slavery into these new territories. Ending slavery in the South was not his main goal. In fact, he makes this quite clear. He says in one letter to Horace Greeley, I think, if I could save the Union by keeping the slaves in the South, I would. If I could save the Union by eliminating the slaves in the South, I would. If I could save the Union by buying the slaves and sending them somewhere else, I would. He wants to keep the Union together, but no new slavery in the new territories.
And well, saving the Union seems like an obligation for a president, but I'm wondering if you think of his presidency as marking a turning point in the sense that it might have contributed to the offices having perhaps too much power or such high expectations that no one can satisfy them because he was forced to save the Union.
Yes, I think that's part of the point I tried to make in the book is he's a great president, but this is the irony of history. Sometimes the greatest accomplishments create the biggest challenges going forward. He does use the presidency in ways that the founding fathers never intended. Just the most obvious one, he actually conscripts people. Until 1862, the president had no power to force anyone into the military. This was something the founders were against because they hated the fact that the British forced them into the military, right? And so you could not do that. The states had authority, not the federal government. With the Conscription Act of 1862, that Lincoln passes in a Republican-only Congress because the Democrats have left. So it's only his party. He gets this passed. He begins conscription. And that's the beginning, you could say, of the military-industrial complex. Because it's the beginning of the time when a president can actually maintain a large standing army because he can conscript people one way or another. We do it now as a professional military, but it's an outgrowth of that. He's the first true modern military leader as president of the United States.
Okay, so just to paraphrase and make sure that I got it all. So you judge Lincoln as extraordinarily successful because he engendered the preservation of the Union, but this gave the president then such powers and such high expectations that really transcended the intentions of the founding fathers, and hence set expectations way too high for future presidents.
And it created a power that could be misused. He didn't misuse it. Some Southerners would say he did.
Some Southerners would say.
But most historians would say he didn't. But that power could be misused. That's the same power Theodore Roosevelt will use when he wants to go to war abroad, right? It's the same power Franklin Roosevelt will use. So it becomes both an opportunity, but also a sword of Damocles as well.
Yeah. He sounds like a president in the same lineage as Washington in this sense, because my understanding is that people really wanted him to be sort of like a king, but instead he exercised this mythological sort of self-control and didn't abuse that power.
And we should point out, some people did think he had become a tyrant.
Oh, really?
That's why John Wilkes Booth killed him, right? I mean, so there is an active...
I thought you were referring to Washington. Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I'm referring to Lincoln. Yeah. And so Washington died a natural death. He actually died. He got pneumonia when he went outside in the rain. Lincoln was assassinated. He's the first president who was assassinated. And the assassination of Lincoln was a reflection, not just of a crazy man, but of a part of the country that felt he had become a tyrant. And the point I tried to make is he hadn't become a tyrant, but they were right that he had taken on powers no president had had before.
Now, yeah, naturally the Southerners would think he was a tyrant, but this whole discussion begs for me a very obvious question that I didn't think to ask, but just as it was Washington's mandate or self-imposed mandate to create this American identity, just what did Lincoln find so important about preserving the Union? Why not let it disintegrate into two countries?
This is a great question. For Lincoln, the Union was more than just a material thing. It was spiritual. He believed, as a poor man from Kentucky and Illinois, he believed that the Union was the one thing that gave him an opportunity to be something more than just a poor man from Kentucky. That it was an opportunity. He really thought of it that way. And it makes sense because he was not well educated. He had like 2 years of education. He failed at a lot of things, but he eventually became a lawyer, self-trained lawyer, representing railroad companies and others. And what he did was he was arguing in courts for the growth of railways and for the management of power. And he recognized that this was all possible because we had a larger union. There'd be no railroads without that, right? That none of this would exist the way it did. So he believed that the union was essential for development, for opportunity, and for freedom. And it's really important. His Cooper Union Address, which he gives before he's president, 1859, he lays this out. He says very clearly that the union is not something that the states can leave because the states never existed before the union. The union pre-exists the states. That's not true for Texas or Alaska or Hawaii, but it is true for most of the country, right? And so the union is the precursor. The union is the foundation for everything that we do. He thinks of it more as a family than just as a political instrument.
No, I did not know that at all, so I'm really glad that I asked, that he viewed America as an opportunity. It sounds very much like the American dream, and he felt a real loyalty to the country as some higher order thing. What's ironic, though, is that I think of Southerners as the most nationalist and patriotic of Americans, and yet they don't identify with Lincoln. I'm saying Southerners quite broadly. That I don't mean it in that way, but But that's a change. I mean, this is again what we study as historians. That is not how it was viewed in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. There were some exceptions, but no. The states' rights argument was a very strong argument, and the sort of hyper patriotism that we think of today, that's a 20th century creation in the South to serve other purposes.